The briefing room at Bagram Airfield hummed with tension as Lieutenant Commander Jake "Hawk" Morrison entered, carrying a classified folder marked with red stripes. The 6 operators of SEAL Team 7 immediately straightened, their casual banter dying mid-sentence. Morrison's reputation preceded him. 3 tour, 17 successful extractions, 0 men lost. When Hawk called a meeting at 200 hours, it meant something big was brewing. "Seats, gentlemen. And lady," Morrison nodded toward Petty Officer First Class Alina Reyes, who sat between Chief Petty Officer Marcus Tank Williams and Petty Officer Davis. Alina had fought tooth and nail for her position on this team. While the Navy had integrated women into combat roles, the SEAL community remained a brotherhood that few females had cracked. She'd endured twice the scrutiny, twice the physical demands, and twice the skepticism. But after saving Tank's life during a botched rescue in Syria 6 months prior, she'd earned her place at this table. Morrison activated the holographic display. A compound materialized in 3 dimensions, perched on a mountainside like an eagle's nest. "This is our target. Grid coordinates remain classified until wheels up. Location: Nuristan Province, Afghanistan, approximately 40 clicks from the Pakistani border." He tapped the display, zooming in. "These mountains have hidden Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters for 20 years. Intel suggests this particular compound is currently housing someone very special." A new image appeared. A bearded man in his 50s, hard eyes staring at the camera. Khalid Nazari, former Afghan military intelligence, current terrorist facilitator. He's been ghost for 3 years, but SIGINT picked up chatter 2 days ago that places him here. Morrison's jaw tightened. Nazari has detailed knowledge of an imminent attack on U.S. and allied forces. "We're talking coordinates, timing, method. Our sources suggest it could be catastrophic, potentially hundreds of casualties." Alina studied the compound's layout, her mind already calculating angles, sight lines, defensive positions. She'd grown up in El Paso, daughter of a border patrol agent and a trauma nurse. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 8. Her mother had taught her that being underestimated was sometimes your greatest weapon. Both lessons had served her well in the teams. "Time frame?" Tank asked, his deep voice cutting through the room. 72 hours. After that, Nazari moves and we lose him. The attack, according to our intel, happens within the week." Morrison pulled up satellite imagery. "Here's the problem. The compound is reinforced concrete built into the mountain itself. 3 levels, multiple entrances, and current estimates put hostile count at 20 fighters, possibly more." "Possibly more," Davis repeated, shaking his head. "That's a nice way of saying we have no idea what we're walking into." "Correct," Morrison said without hesitation. "This is what we call a fluid situation. The intel is 48 hours old. Thermal imaging shows approximately 20 heat signatures, but these mountains have cave systems. There could be more fighters underground that we can't detect." Alina raised her hand slightly. Morrison nodded to her. "Sir, extraction plan. If we're going in hot with unknown hostile count, what's our exit strategy?" "Good question, Reyes." Morrison zoomed out on the map. "Primary exfil is here, a clearing 2 clicks northeast of the compound. Black Hawks will be on standby. We breach at 300 hours, secure Nazari, and move to exfil. Total mission time should be 45 minutes, wheels up to wheels down." He paused. "If primary is compromised, secondary exfil is 4 clicks south, but that means moving through hostile territory with potentially wounded and a high-value target." "I don't like it, but it's there if we need it." The room fell silent as each operator processed the information. Alina felt the familiar pre-mission sensation, part adrenaline, part focus, part fear she'd learned to channel into precision. She'd been on 17 missions with Team 7. Some had been textbook. Others had descended into chaos. You never knew which you'd get until you were boots on ground. "Rules of engagement?" asked Petty Officer Martinez, the team's explosives expert. "We need Nazari alive and able to talk. Everyone else is a legitimate target if they pose a threat. But remember, We're not there to fight a war. We're there for one man and the information in his head. Speed and precision. Get in, get him, get out. Morrison looked at each operator individually, his gaze finally settling on Alina. Rays, you'll be providing overwatch with Davis. There's a ridge here. He highlighted a position on the map. That gives you sight lines on 3 of the compound's 4 entrances. You'll be our eyes, and if things go sideways, our guardian angel. Alina nodded. Understood, sir. One more thing, Morrison said, his voice dropping. Intelligence rates this mission at 75% probability of enemy contact. That's higher than usual. I need every one of you sharp, focused, and ready for whatever hell those mountains throw at us. We've trained for this. We're the best at what we do. But don't get cocky. These mountains have swallowed better men than us. He closed the folder. Kid up. Wheels up in 6 hours. Get some rest if you can. Dismissed. As the team filed out, Alina lingered, studying the holographic compound one more time. Something about it bothered her. The way it sat on that ridge, the multiple levels, the cave systems behind it. It looked less like a hideout and more like a fortress. Morrison noticed her hesitation. Something on your mind, Rays. She pointed to the compound's western wall. This section, sir. If they've reinforced it like the rest, and we breach here as planned, what's our structural integrity? These old compounds sometimes have weak points that aren't visible on satellite. Morrison studied the image, then looked at her with newfound respect. Good eye. I'll have engineering run additional analysis before we go. He paused. You worried about this one? Alina met his gaze. I'm worried about everyone, sir. That's what keeps me alive. He smiled slightly. That's what makes you a good operator, Rays. See you at the bird. As Alina walked back to her quarters, the Afghan night pressed down around her. Somewhere in those mountains, a terrorist sat with knowledge that could save hundreds of lives. In 6 hours, she'd be hunting him through the darkness. She had no way of knowing that in less than 72 hours, she'd be hunting for something far more precious, her commander's life, and that the real mission hadn't even begun. The Black Hawk's rotors beat against the thin mountain air like a war drum, the rhythmic thumping the only sound louder than Alina's heartbeat. She sat between Tank and Davis, her M4 carbine held vertically between her knees, her mind running through the mission parameters for the 100th time. The helicopter's interior was bathed in red light, casting everyone in an eerie crimson glow that made them look like warriors from some ancient myth. Morrison sat across from her, his face unreadable behind his night vision goggles. Even in the dim light, Alina could see the concentration in his posture, the way his fingers drummed once against his thigh, the slight tilt of his head as he listened to communications from command. He caught her looking and gave a subtle nod. She nodded back. No words needed. The loadmaster's voice crackled through their headsets. 5 minutes to insertion point. Alina's stomach tightened. This was always the worst part, the waiting, the approach, the moments before chaos potentially erupted. She'd learned to channel the fear, transform it into razor-sharp focus. Her hands moved automatically, checking her gear for the 3rd time since takeoff. Magazine seated properly, sidearms secure, knife accessible, radio functioning. The ritual calmed her, gave her hands something to do while her mind prepared for what waited below. The helicopter banked hard left, descending rapidly. Through the open door, Alina glimpsed the Hindu Kush mountains rising like jagged teeth against the star-filled sky, beautiful and deadly. These mountains had been fighting ground for empires, Alexander the Great, the British, the Soviets, and now them. The land remembered all that blood. 30 seconds, the loadmaster announced. Morrison stood, gripping the overhead rail. Listen up, he shouted over the rotor noise. We stick to the plan. Rays and Davis, you've got exactly 12 minutes to reach overwatch position. The rest of us move on the compound at 300 sharp. Questions? Silence. Good. Let's bring Nazari home and get back for breakfast. The Black Hawk flared hard, kicking up dust and loose stones. Go, 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 the loadmaster yelled. Alina was out the door before the skids touched earth, her boots hitting rocky ground in a practiced crouch. The team fanned out in a defensive perimeter as the helicopter lifted away, its sound fading into the distance until only the mountain wind remained. The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive, broken only by the rasp of controlled breathing through their communications. Morrison's hand signals were crisp, precise. The team moved out in tactical formation, weapons up, night vision transforming the darkness into a green-tinted otherworld. Alina and Davis broke off immediately, moving northeast toward their overwatch position. The ridge was 800 meters away, uphill through terrain that shifted treacherously under their boots. They moved in silence, weapons sweeping their sectors. Alina's senses were hyper-alert. Every sound, every shadow, every change in the wind registered in her consciousness. This was her element, where months of brutal training translated into pure instinct. Davis was 10 meters ahead, his larger frame surprisingly graceful as he navigated the rocks. Halfway to the ridge, Alina froze. Her hand shot up in a fist, the signal for stop. Davis immediately dropped to a knee, weapon ready. Alina pointed to the ground, then held up 3 fingers, footprints, recent ones. The soil was still loose, meaning they'd been made within the last hour. Davis moved back to her position, examining the tracks. He keyed his radio, voice barely a whisper. "Hawk, this is Overwatch 2. We've got fresh boot prints crossing our path. Multiple individuals heading northeast. Time stamp approximately 1 hour old." Morrison's response was instant but calm. "Copy that. Assess and advise." Alina studied the terrain, her mind racing. The prints led away from the compound, deeper into the mountains. Either a patrol returning from somewhere or fighters moving to a different position. She counted the tracks, at least 6 individuals, possibly more. "Hawk, estimate 6 to 8 personnel. Tracks lead away from target area. Recommend we continue to position." "Roger, proceed with caution. Keep me updated." Alina and Davis continued their climb, moving even more carefully now. The compound came into view 15 minutes later, a squat, brutal structure of reinforced concrete built into the mountainside exactly as the satellite imagery had shown. But seeing it in person sent a chill down Alina's spine. It looked wrong somehow, too quiet, too still. They reached their overwatch position, a rocky outcropping that gave them clear sight lines to 3 of the compound's 4 entrances. Davis set up his rifle while Alina scanned through her scope, counting heat signatures through the thermal imaging. "Hawk, Overwatch in position. Thermal shows. Stand by." She counted again, her pulse quickening. "Sir, I'm counting at least 32 heat signatures. Repeat, 32 hostiles. That's significantly higher than intel suggested." There was a pause on the radio. Alina could almost feel Morrison processing this information, recalculating odds, assessing risk. "Confirmed 3-2. "Confirmed, sir. And that's just what I can see from this angle. The eastern section is blocked from our view, could be more." Through her scope, Alina watched the compound. Guards patrolled the perimeter in pairs, their movements disciplined and professional. This wasn't some ragtag militia, these were trained fighters. Movement caught her eye near the main entrance. A figure emerged, talking on a radio. Even from this distance, even through the grainy thermal imaging, something about his bearing suggested authority. "Possible Nazari sighting at main entrance," she reported. "Can't confirm identity, but target matches physical profile." "Keep eyes on," Morrison ordered. "All units, we've got higher hostile count than expected. This changes our approach. Tank Martinez, swing wide to the south entrance. We're going to create a diversion. Raise Davis, I need you to." Morrison's voice cut off abruptly. Alina's blood went cold. "Hawk, say again, you're breaking up." Static. Then Morrison's voice returned but strained. "Movement on our position. Multiple contacts. We've been—" The radio exploded with gunfire. The staccato bursts unmistakable even through the electronic feed. "Hawk," Alina called. "What's your status?" Through her scope, she saw the compound come alive. Lights blazed on. Fighters poured from buildings. Shouts echoed across the valley. The mission had just gone completely sideways and they hadn't even reached the breach point. "All units, we are engaged," Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Heavy resistance, west approach." They were waiting for. An explosion drowned out his words. Through her scope, Alina saw the flash illuminate the valley, an RPG strike against the rocks where Morrison's team had been moving. Davis was already repositioning his rifle. "I've got no clear shot. Too many friendlies mixed with hostiles." Alina's mind raced, training overriding panic. The compound's western wall, where Morrison's team had been approaching, was now obscured by smoke and dust. She could see muzzle flashes, hear the distinctive reports of American weapons mixed with AK-47 fire. The tactical situation had deteriorated from surgical strike to full-blown firefight in seconds. "Rays, we need to relocate," Davis shouted. "We're too exposed up here." But Alina couldn't move. Through the chaos and smoke, through the thermal bloom of explosions and gunfire, she was desperately trying to locate Morrison's signal, his heat signature, any sign that her commander was still in the fight. Then she saw it, the western wall of the compound beginning to collapse, massive chunks of concrete breaking away as the structure failed. And somewhere in that falling debris, in that cloud of dust and destruction, was Morrison. "Commander," she screamed into the radio. "Hawk, respond." Only static answered, and the sound of her own heart breaking. The world seemed to move in slow motion as Alina watched the western wall crumble through her scope. Massive concrete slabs broke away from the compound like pieces of a shattered puzzle, tumbling down the mountainside in clouds of dust and debris. Somewhere in that chaos, Morrison and his team were fighting for their lives. "All units, fall back to secondary positions." Tank's voice boomed through the radio, taking command as senior enlisted. "We've got multiple RPG teams on the ridgeline. Martinez is hit. I repeat, Martinez is down." Alina's training warred with her instinct. Every fiber of her being screamed to abandon her position and rush down to help, but she forced herself to stay focused. An Overwatch sniper who abandoned her post was useless to everyone. She swept her scope across the compound, searching for targets, for Morrison, for anything that made sense in the madness below. "I've got eyes on 3 RPG teams," Davis called out beside her, his rifle barking twice. "One down, Ray's northeast corner, second floor window." Alina swung her rifle right, found the target, a fighter loading another rocket-propelled grenade. She controlled her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow despite the adrenaline, and squeezed the trigger. The fighter dropped. Target eliminated. But for every enemy they took down, 2 more seemed to appear. The compound was a hornet's nest and they'd kicked it hard. Fire poured from windows, doorways, and rooftop positions. The Taliban had known they were coming, or at least they'd been prepared for an attack. This wasn't random security. This was an ambush. "Hawk, what's your position?" Tank's voice carried an edge of desperation now. "Commander Morrison, respond." Static, then a different voice, Petty Officer Chen, his words rapid and breathless. "Tank, the western approach is completely collapsed." Hawk was on point when the RPG hit. "The whole structure came down. I can't see him, I can't." His transmission dissolved into the sound of automatic weapons fire. Alina's hands tightened on her rifle. Through the scope, she could see the massive pile of rubble where the wall had stood. Rebar jutted out at twisted angles. Concrete chunks the size of cars had tumbled down the slope. If Morrison had been caught in that collapse. "Rays, we need to move." Davis grabbed her shoulder. "They've spotted our position." Rounds cracked past them, striking the rocks behind their position with sharp whines. Alina rolled left as Davis returned fire, his rifle bucking against his shoulder in controlled bursts. Below, she could see fighters repositioning, trying to flank the SEAL team's scattered positions. "Tank, this is Overwatch," Alina called into her radio. forcing her voice to remain steady. Enemy forces are attempting to flank your southern position. I count 8 hostiles moving through the ravine, approximately 100 meters from your location. Copy that, can you engage? Alina was already adjusting her position, finding stable shooting posture on the rocky outcrop. The range was far, nearly 600 meters, and the targets were moving fast through broken terrain. She'd trained for this thousands of times, but training and real combat were different universes. Through her scope, she tracked the lead fighter, calculated for wind, elevation, the target's movement. She fired. The lead fighter went down. She worked the bolt smoothly, found her next target, fired again. Another drop. The remaining fighters scattered, diving for cover, their flanking maneuver disrupted. Good shooting, Rays. Tank's voice carried relief and urgency in equal measure. But we need to extract. Where's our air support? As if summoning it, Alina heard the distant thump of helicopter rotors. 2 Apache gunships appeared over the ridgeline, their 30 chain guns already spinning. The cavalry had arrived, but even as the Apache engaged enemy positions with devastating effect, Alina's mind was locked on one thing: Morrison's last known position. All SEAL units, this is Guardian 6. A new voice cut through the radio, the mission commander speaking from the safety of Bagram Airfield. You are authorized for emergency extraction. Black Hawks inbound to primary exfil point, ETA 3 minutes. Break contact and move to extraction. Tank's voice was granite hard. Guardian 6, we have a man unaccounted for. Commander Morrison is missing. We are not leaving without. Chief Williams, your position is untenable. You have multiple wounded and are outnumbered 4-1. The compound is collapsing, and we have intelligence suggesting more enemy forces are en route to your location. You will extract immediately. That is an order. The silence that followed felt like death itself. Alina wanted to scream into the radio, to tell them all that they couldn't leave, that Morrison was down there somewhere, that SEALs never left a man behind. But she also knew the brutal calculus of combat. They had wounded. They were surrounded. The mission had failed catastrophically. Copy that, Guardian 6, Tank finally said, and Alina could hear the agony in those 3 words. All units fighting, retreat to primary exfil. Stay tight, cover your sectors. Through her scope, Alina watched Team 7 begin their withdrawal, Chen half-carrying Martinez, whose leg was soaked with blood. Tank moved backward, firing controlled bursts to suppress enemy pursuit. The Apache worked overhead, their missiles and cannon fire buying the team precious seconds. But Alina couldn't tear her eyes away from the rubble pile. She zoomed her scope to maximum magnification, scanning desperately for any sign of movement, any heat signature, anything that suggested Morrison had survived. The dust was beginning to settle, revealing the true extent of the collapse. Tons of concrete and stone had buried the western approach. Rays, we need to move now. Davis was packing his equipment, preparing for their own withdrawal to the extraction point. The Black Hawks won't wait. I can't see him, Alina whispered, still searching through her scope. Davis, I can't see any sign of him. Then he's gone. Davis's voice was harsh but not cruel, just the terrible practicality of a warrior who'd seen too many brothers fall. Alina, look at me. He grabbed her shoulder, forcing her to meet his eyes. If he's under that, there's nothing we can do. We stay here, we die too. Is that what Hawk would want? She knew the answer. Morrison would order them to leave, to save themselves, to complete the extraction. He'd make the same call Tank had made. But knowing the right answer and accepting it were 2 different things entirely. A new sound cut through the chaos, small arms fire, getting closer. The enemy fighters were pushing hard now, emboldened by the SEALs' retreat. Several had broken from the compound and were moving up the slope toward the overwatch position. Contact front. Davis engaged them, his rifle spitting fire. Rays, I need you in this fight. Training took over. Alina swung her rifle around, found targets, engaged. 2 fighters dropped. 3 more took their place. The slope below had become a shooting gallery, with Alina and Davis as the targets. They were running out of time. Overwatch, this is Tank. Where are you? Black Hawk is on the ground taking fire. We need to go now. Alina fired her last rounds, dropped the magazine, slapped in a fresh one. Through the gun's smoke and chaos, she took one last look at the rubble pile through her scope. Still nothing. No movement. No signal. Morrison's locator beacon had gone dark at the moment of collapse. She'd been monitoring it obsessively. If he was alive down there, he was alone, buried, and they were about to leave him to whatever fate awaited. Moving, Davis shouted, already scrambling down from their position. Alina forced herself to stand, to turn away from the scope, to leave the position. Every step felt like betrayal. She could hear the Black Hawk's rotors now, could see the dust cloud it kicked up at the extraction point 400 meters away. Tank and the others were loading aboard, weapons still firing to suppress the pursuing enemy. She ran, legs pumping, lungs burning in the thin mountain air. Rounds cracked past her head. Davis was ahead, almost to the helicopter. She could see Tank in the doorway, waving them in frantically. Martinez lay on the deck, the medic working on his leg. Chen was bleeding from a head wound but still conscious. 50 meters, 30, 20. Alina dove through the door as the helicopter was already lifting, Tank's strong hand catching her gear and hauling her inside. The Black Hawk's door gunners opened up with their miniguns, the sound deafening, tracers cutting red lines through the darkness as they suppressed the enemy fighters who pursued them down the mountain. The helicopter banked hard, gaining altitude, and Alina finally allowed herself to look back. The compound was shrinking below them, wreathed in smoke and dust. The Apache made one final gun run, their missiles impacting with bright orange flashes. Then they too turned away, following the extraction bird back toward friendly territory. Tank sat down heavily beside Alina, his face a mask of anguish and dust. Blood not his own covered his uniform. "I had to make the call," he said, not looking at her. "I had to." "I know," Alina managed to say, though the words felt like broken glass in her throat. The flight back to Bagram was 43 minutes that felt like 43 years. Nobody spoke. Martinez groaned softly as the medic worked on him. Chen stared at nothing, his eyes empty. Davis cleaned his weapon with mechanical precision, a ritual to keep his hands busy and his mind from fracturing. But Alina couldn't stop replaying those final seconds before the collapse. Morrison's signal strong and clear, then suddenly gone. She'd failed him. They'd all failed him. The compound had been a trap and they'd walked right into it. Nazari was in the wind. Martinez might lose his leg. And their commander, the man who'd never lost an operator, who'd brought them through 17 missions without a single fatality, was buried under tons of rubble in hostile territory. As Bagram's lights came into view ahead, Alina made a decision that would either end her career or define it. She didn't speak it aloud, didn't share it with the hollow-eyed warriors around her. But as the Black Hawk settled onto the tarmac and the rotors began to wind down, as the medics rushed forward to take Martinez, as the brass appeared to begin their inevitable debrief, Alina Reyes knew with absolute certainty what she was going to do. She was going back. Morrison had taught them that SEALs never leave a man behind. Command might have ordered the extraction. The mission might have failed. The official reports might list him as KIA. But Alina Reyes didn't take orders from paperwork. And she wasn't leaving her commander in those mountains. Not today. Not ever. The debrief room at Bagram felt like a tomb. Harsh fluorescent lights cast everything in sterile white, making the blood still on their uniforms look obscenely bright. Alina sat ramrod straight in her chair, her body present but her mind still in those mountains, still watching that wall collapse in slow motion. Commander Phillips from Naval Special Warfare Group stood at the head of the table, his face carved from stone. Behind him, satellite feeds displayed the compound, or what remained of it. Smoke still rose from multiple impact points. The western wall was completely gone, replaced by a massive debris field. At 3:47 hours, Lieutenant Commander Morrison's locator beacon went dark, Phillips stated, his voice clinical, detached. Thermal imaging from the Apache gunships detected no heat signatures in the collapse zone after the extraction. Communications ceased at time of collapse. No emergency beacon activation was recorded. Tank's fist hit the table hard enough to make everyone jump. We should have gone back for him. We had time to. You had 8 wounded fighters pursuing your position and more en route, Phillips cut him off. You made the right call, Chief Williams, the call that kept the rest of your team alive. He paused, and for a moment something like sympathy flickered across his face. The call Commander Morrison would have made himself. Elena spoke for the first time since entering the room, her voice quiet but steady. What about a rescue operation? Phillips looked at her, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. Petty Officer Reyes, current enemy force estimates put approximately 60 to 80 fighters in and around that compound. The collapse destabilized the entire structure. Our engineers assess it as critically unstable. Another collapse could happen at any moment. A rescue operation would require significant air support, ground forces, and would take hours to execute in hostile territory. So we're just leaving him there? Davis demanded. He could be alive under that rubble, injured, trapped. The thermal imaging was conclusive, Phillips interrupted. No life signs detected. The amount of debris, the force of the collapse. Gentlemen and Petty Officer Reyes, I know this is difficult to hear, but Lieutenant Commander Morrison is gone. Mission status is failed. The high-value target escaped, and we lost one of the finest officers in naval special warfare. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elena felt something crack inside her chest, a fissure that spread through her entire being. Morrison, who'd given her a chance when others said a woman couldn't hack it in the teams. Morrison, who'd trained her personally, pushed her harder than anyone else because he expected more, not less. Morrison, who'd looked her in the eye before every mission and said, "Come back safe, Reyes." She hadn't kept him safe. None of them had. Official status, Tank asked, his voice hollow. Missing in action, presumed killed in action, Phillips said. Next of kin have been notified. A memorial service will be scheduled once recovery is deemed possible, if it becomes possible. He closed his folder. I know you all want answers about how this happened, how intelligence failed so catastrophically. That investigation is ongoing, but right now you need medical evaluation, rest, and time to process this loss. You're dismissed. Nobody moved. They sat there like statues, 7 warriors who'd gone into the mountains as a team and come back broken, missing the one piece that held them together. Finally, Tank stood, his movement stiff like an old man's. Come on, let's get Martinez to medical, get cleaned up. He looked at each of them. Hawk would want us to take care of each other. That's what we do now. We take care of each other. They filed out in silence. Elena moved on autopilot, walking through the base as dawn broke over the Afghan horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her too much of explosions and fire. Other personnel gave them wide berth. Word had already spread. SEAL Team 7 had lost their commander. She made it to her quarters before the trembling started. Her hands shook as she tried to remove her gear, fingers fumbling with buckles and straps that she'd manipulated thousands of times before. Her rifle clattered to the floor. She sank down beside it, back against the wall, and for the first time since childhood, Elena Reyes allowed herself to cry. But tears lasted only minutes. As the sun climbed higher, as the base came alive with the sounds of another day in the endless war, something else took root inside her. Not acceptance, not grief. Something harder, sharper, forged in the fire of loss and tempered by rage at the injustice of it all. She pulled out her laptop and logged into the classified network. The mission files were already updated. Operation Highland Serpent failed. KIA, LCDR Jake Morrison. The bureaucracy of death reduced to acronyms and timestamps. But Elena didn't read the official report. Instead, she pulled up the raw drone footage from the mission. Frame by frame, she watched the collapse. She studied every pixel, every shadow, every piece of information the cameras had captured. The explosion, the wall coming down, the dust cloud obscuring everything. Then she saw it. 3 minutes and 47 seconds after the collapse, a heat signature, faint, barely there but present. It moved just slightly in the debris field. Then the dust cloud obscured it completely, and by the time visibility cleared, nothing registered on thermal imaging. Alina replayed it 15 times. The timestamp was burned into her brain, 0350-47. Morrison's beacon had gone dark at 0347-00. That meant for 3 minutes and 47 seconds after he was officially declared dead, something or someone had been alive in that rubble. A knock on her door made her close the laptop quickly. Yeah. Tank entered, his face haggard, aged a decade in a single night. He'd showered, but his eyes were still red. You okay, Rays? No, Chief, you. He almost smiled. No. He sat down on the edge of her rack, heavy with exhaustion. Martinez is going to keep his leg, barely. Chen has a concussion, but he'll be fine. The rest of us are just dealing with it. Alina nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Tank studied her for a long moment. I know that look, Rays. I've seen it in the mirror. You're thinking about that rubble pile. You're thinking you saw something, some sign he's alive. You're thinking about going back. She met his eyes. I did see something. A heat signature 3 minutes after the beacon went dark. It was there, Tank. Someone was alive in that debris. Could have been anyone. Could have been enemy fighters, could have been thermal distortion from the fires, could have been. Could have been him, Alina finished, and we left him there. Tank's jaw worked, emotions warring across his face. Orders were to extract. Mission was compromised. We had wounded. You know the calculus as well as I do. I know you made the right call, Alina said softly. For the team, for the mission parameters, I know Hawk would have made the same call. She paused, but that doesn't mean I have to accept it. Alina, Tank never used her first name. The fact that he did now told her how serious this moment was. If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, don't. You'll be court-martialed. You'll lose everything you've worked for. Your career, your pension, possibly your freedom. And for what? To get yourself killed in those mountains on some desperate hope that he's alive. You didn't see what I saw on that footage. Then show it to Phillips, go through proper channels, request a rescue operation. Alina laughed, but there was no humor in it. You heard him, Tank. They've already written Morrison off. No rescue authorized. Too dangerous, too many hostiles, structure too unstable. They're not sending anyone back there. We both know it. Tank stood up, packing the small room like a caged animal. So what, you're going to go rogue? One operator, no support, no backup, into hostile territory swarming with enemy fighters, to dig through tons of rubble on the chance, the microscopic chance, that he's somehow alive under there. Yes, Alina said simply. That's insane. Probably. You'll die. Maybe. Alina, for God's sake, Tank stopped, his shoulders sagging. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. He's already gone. You know it, I know it. No one survives that kind of collapse. You don't know that, not for certain, not until someone goes back and confirms it. Alina stood, moving to her gear locker. I've been running scenarios all morning. There are villages in those mountains, locals who owe me favors from previous operations. I speak the language. I know the terrain. I can move through there without being detected by the Taliban. And then what? You find the compound, which is now an enemy stronghold, and do what exactly? Dig through rubble by yourself. If I have to. Tank grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me. I loved him too. He was the best commander I ever served under. He was my friend. And it's killing me that we left him there, but throwing your life away won't bring him back. Alina gently removed his hands. I'm not throwing my life away, Chief. I'm doing what he taught us to do. I'm not leaving a man behind." She began pulling civilian clothes from her locker, local dress, a headscarf, items she'd collected over multiple deployments for situations exactly like this. "If you do this, I can't protect you," Tank said. "Command will come down on you hard." "I know. You'll be charged with desertion, going AWOL in a combat zone, unauthorized operations in hostile territory." "I know. You'll never be a SEAL again." Alina stopped packing and looked at him. "Tank, if I don't try to bring him home, I don't deserve to be a SEAL. This isn't about regulations or career or even about following orders. This is about the code. The real code, the one that matters more than any official manual. We don't leave our brothers behind. Ever." Tank stared at her for a long time. Finally, he moved to the door. Before leaving, he turned back. "If anyone asks, I never saw you pack that bag. I never heard your plan. And I certainly didn't tell you that there's a supply convoy heading toward Fob Caligash at 1400 hours, near those mountains. I definitely didn't mention that security is light and someone could probably hitch a ride without being noticed." Alina felt tears prick her eyes again. "Thank you, Chief." "Don't thank me, just," he paused. "Bring him home, Rays, or don't come back at all. Because if you fail and survive, I'll kill you myself for making me lose both of you." After he left, Alina finished packing. She had 12 hours before that convoy departed. 12 hours to gather intelligence, plan her infiltration, and prepare for a mission that would either make her a legend or end her life in those unforgiving mountains. She pulled up the drone footage one more time, freezing it on that heat signature. "I'm coming, Commander," she whispered to the screen. "Just hold on a little longer. I'm coming." Outside her window, the Afghan sun climbed higher, indifferent to human suffering, indifferent to loss. Somewhere in those mountains, Khalid Nazari was celebrating his escape. Somewhere in those mountains, dozens of Taliban fighters were reinforcing their positions. And somewhere in those mountains, buried under tons of concrete and stone, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison might still be breathing. Alina Reyes was about to find out which. The supply convoy rumbled past Fob Caligash at 1437 hours, and Alina Reyes was no longer on it. She crouched in a dried riverbed 3 kilometers from the compound, wearing the clothes of a local woman, dusty blue burqa covering her gear, her weapons hidden beneath the flowing fabric. Her face was darkened with dirt, her hands stained with walnut dye to match the local complexion. To any casual observer, she was just another Afghan refugee fleeing the fighting. But beneath the disguise, she was every inch a SEAL operator on a mission. The past 12 hours had been a blur of preparation and deception. She traded favors with a local translator, a woman named Fahima who'd helped the Americans before and understood the debt of honor. Fahima had provided the clothes, the dye, and most importantly, information about safe houses in the villages surrounding the compound. "The Taliban control the mountains now," Fahima had warned in Pashto. "After your attack, they brought more fighters. They think you will come back." "They're right," Alina had replied in the same language. "But they're looking for soldiers, not a widow searching for her family." Now, as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Alina moved through her first village. She kept her head down, her movements those of a woman exhausted by war and loss. An old man smoking a pipe watched her pass but said nothing. 2 children played in the dust, their laughter a strange sound in this landscape of violence. She found the safe house Fahima had described, a mud brick structure on the village's edge, marked by a blue door with 3 stones stacked beside it. Alina knocked using the pattern Fahima had taught her. Once, pause, 3 times quickly, pause twice. The door opened a crack. An elderly woman peered out, her face a map of wrinkles and wisdom. She looked Alina up and down, then spoke in rapid Pashto. "Fahima's friend." "Yes, grandmother." The woman pulled her inside quickly, barred the door. "You are the American woman, the one who fights like a man. I'm just looking for someone, Elena said carefully. The commander, yes, I know. The old woman moved to a window checking the street. The whole valley knows. The Americans came with helicopters and guns. The fighting lasted an hour. Many Taliban died. They say an American leader was buried in the stones. Elena's heart hammered. Do they say if he lives? The old woman shrugged. The Taliban speak of a prize. A living American would be valuable, yes. They would parade him, use him for their videos, trade him for their captured brothers. She looked at Elena with sharp eyes. But they speak of nothing like this. Only of killing Americans and defending the compound. This tells me something. That he's dead, Elena said, the words like ash in her mouth. Or that they don't have him. The woman poured tea from a battered pot. The compound is dangerous now. The walls crack and groan. Some sections have collapsed further. The Taliban fear going into the deep places. They say jinn, spirits haunt the ruins. Elena accepted the tea, using the moment to think. If Morrison was alive but trapped in an unstable section, the Taliban might not have reached him yet. But every hour that passed decreased his chances of survival. Dehydration, injuries, hypothermia in the cold mountain nights. Time was her enemy as much as the fighters guarding the compound. I need to get close, Elena said, to see for myself. The old woman nodded as if she'd expected this. There is a shepherd path. It leads behind the compound to the caves where my husband once kept goats before the wars came. From there you can see the western side where the stones fell. But it is dangerous. Patrols use these paths now. Show me. For the next 2 days, Elena became a ghost. She moved through villages with the sunrise and sunset crowds, times when women traveled to wells or tended animals, when one more covered figure drew no attention. She traded on the hospitality rules that governed Pashtun culture, accepting tea and bread from families who would never turn away a traveler, even one who might be their enemy. She learned patterns. The Taliban fighters rotated guards every 6 hours. They were disciplined but not infallible. There was a 15-minute gap during shift changes when sections of their perimeter went unwatched. Patrols followed predictable routes, varying them only slightly. And every afternoon at 14:30 hours, most fighters gathered for afternoon prayers, leaving minimum security. On the 3rd day, Elena reached the shepherd path. She ditched the burqa for more practical clothing, local male dress that gave her freedom of movement. Her hair was bound tight under a pakal cap, her face still darkened. From a distance, in the fading light, she could pass for a young man. The path wound through rocky terrain that would break an ankle if traversed carelessly. Elena moved with patient precision, each footfall tested before committing her weight. The compound rose before her, and from this angle, she could finally see the full extent of the damage. The western wall had completely collapsed, creating a massive debris field that spilled down the mountainside like a frozen waterfall of concrete and stone. Rebar jutted out at savage angles. Wooden beams lay splintered. And somewhere in that chaos of destruction, if he'd survived the initial collapse, Morrison could be trapped. Elena settled into an observation position behind a boulder cluster, pulling out a small pair of binoculars. She studied the compound systematically, memorizing guard positions, counting fighters, identifying the most dangerous obstacles. As darkness fell, she switched to night vision, a compact monocular she'd smuggled in her gear. That's when she saw him. Through the green glow of night vision in the thermal mode, she detected a heat signature in the debris field. Not where the main collapse had occurred, but slightly to the north, where the structure had partially caved rather than completely pancaking. The signature was faint, barely registering, but it was there, and it was human-sized. Elena's breath caught. She watched for 30 minutes and twice she saw movement. Slight, barely perceptible, but movement nonetheless. Someone was alive in that rubble. Someone was trapped, probably injured, definitely weakening with each passing hour. She needed confirmation before she committed to an extraction. If this was just an enemy fighter caught in the collapse, she'd be risking everything for nothing. But if it was Morrison? Alina made a decision that would either validate her mad quest or prove her foolishness. She needed to get closer, close enough to identify the heat signature, close enough to know if 3 days of unauthorized operations, career suicide, and potential death were for her commander or a stranger. She waited until 200 hours, the dead zone of the night when even sentries fought sleep. Then Alina Reyes moved down from her observation point toward the compound. Every skill she'd learned in Bud-S training and beyond focused on one objective: reach that debris field without being detected. The distance was 200 meters across open ground, then through the rubble. She moved in short bounds, using shadows and terrain features for cover. Once, she froze for 10 minutes as a patrol passed 30 meters away, their flashlights sweeping the darkness. Her hand rested on the suppressed pistol hidden under her clothing, but killing a guard would alert the entire compound. She had to be invisible. It took 45 minutes to cover 200 meters. When she finally reached the debris field's edge, Alina allowed herself 3 deep breaths to steady her racing heart. Then she began climbing over the rubble, moving toward that faint heat signature. The debris was treacherous, shifting under her weight. Twice, small avalanches of concrete chunks tumbled away, sounding impossibly loud in the silence. Alina froze each time, waiting for shouts of alarm, for flashlights to swing her way. But the Taliban fighters seemed unwilling to investigate the unstable ruins at night. The old woman had been right about their superstitious fear of the collapse site. Closer now. The heat signature was stronger. Alina pulled out her night vision monocular again, studying the rubble configuration. There, a gap between 2 massive concrete slabs, creating a small void space. The heat signature was coming from inside that void. Alina approached the gap, listening. At first, only the sound of wind through the ruins. Then something else, shallow, ragged breathing. Someone was alive down there, struggling for each breath in what little air remained. She pulled a small flashlight from her pocket, covering most of the lens with her fingers to create just a sliver of illumination. She aimed it into the gap and saw Morrison's face. He was barely recognizable, covered in dust and dried blood, his left eye swollen shut, his lips cracked and bleeding. But it was him. His good eye opened at the light, unfocused and glazed with pain and dehydration. "Commander," Alina whispered, her voice cracking with emotion she'd held back for 3 days. "Sir, it's Reyes, I'm here. I've got you." Morrison's eye tried to focus on her. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. How long had he been without water? 3 days in this heat, trapped in rubble, probably with broken bones and internal injuries. "Don't try to talk," Alina said softly. She had a water bottle and she carefully squeezed a few drops through the gap onto Morrison's lips. He swallowed reflexively, his body desperate for fluid. "I need to get you out, but I have to assess the structure first. Can you move your legs?" Morrison's head moved slightly. She thought it might have been a shake. Not good. If his legs were pinned or broken, extraction became exponentially more complicated. Alina studied the void space. The 2 concrete slabs had fallen at an angle, creating a triangular pocket that had saved Morrison's life, but also imprisoned him. Moving either slab without proper equipment would risk another collapse, but leaving him here meant he'd die slowly of dehydration if his injuries didn't kill him first. She heard voices, guards changing position nearby. Alina pressed herself flat against the rubble, invisible in her dark clothing. The guards passed without noticing anything amiss, but dawn was coming soon, and with it, the impossibility of remaining hidden. "Sir, I'm going to get you out," Alina whispered into the gap once the guards had moved away. "But I need to prepare. I'll be back tonight with equipment. Can you hold on until then?" Morrison's eye found hers, and despite everything, the pain, the dehydration, the fear, she saw the ghost of the commander she knew. His hand moved slightly, fingers trying to form something. It took her a moment to realize he was attempting a thumbs up. "That's an order, Commander," Alina said, forcing strength into her voice even as tears threatened to spill. "You hold on. That's an order from your subordinate, and you taught me SEALs always follow orders when it matters." She gave him more water, drop by precious drop, then carefully hid the bottle where he could reach it if he had any mobility. Then Alina Reyes melted back into the darkness, her mind already planning the extraction. Morrison was alive. Against all odds, buried under tons of rubble, left for dead by his own command, her commander had survived 3 days in hell. Now Alina just had to figure out how to get him out before the Taliban found him, before the structure collapsed further, before his injuries and dehydration finished what the explosion had started. She moved back toward her observation point as dawn painted the mountains in shades of gold and red. Behind her, in that small void space between fallen concrete slabs, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison fought to take his next breath. And 200 meters away, Petty Officer Alina Reyes began planning an extraction that would either become legend or get them both killed. The real mission had finally begun. Alina spent the day in a cave overlooking the compound, her body motionless but her mind racing through scenarios. She had perhaps 12 hours before Morrison's condition became critical. Dehydration in this heat could kill him, and she had no idea what internal injuries he might have sustained. Every moment counted, but rushing in without a plan would get them both killed. She'd managed to scavenge supplies from a Taliban cache she'd discovered 2 kilometers away, a small victory that felt like divine intervention. Rope, a pry bar, medical supplies, and most importantly, an old hand crank winch that shepherds once used to move heavy stones. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. As the sun set and darkness reclaimed the mountains, Alina made her final preparations. She'd mapped out every guard position, every patrol route, every blind spot in the compound's security. The Taliban had grown complacent. 3 days without American retaliation had made them believe no rescue was coming. They were right about that. Command wasn't sending anyone. But they'd failed to account for one operator who refused to accept that truth. At 23:30 hours, Alina began her approach. She'd cached her supplies at the debris field's edge during the previous night's reconnaissance. Now she moved with the patience of a predator, each step calculated, each breath controlled. The night vision monocular showed her the heat signatures of guards, most clustered near the intact sections of the compound, leaving the unstable ruins largely unwatched. She reached Morrison's position at midnight. Through the gap she could see him, still alive but weaker. His breathing had become more labored, and his good eye didn't track her movements as sharply as before. Time was running out. "Commander," she whispered, pressing close to the opening. "I'm back. We're doing this now." Morrison's eye flickered open. His lips moved, and this time she heard his voice, a dry rasp barely louder than the wind. "Reyes shouldn't have come." "Save your strength, sir. I'm going to get you out, but I need you to stay conscious. Can you do that for me?" She passed the water bottle through the gap. "Small sips. Let me assess the situation." She studied the concrete slabs with her flashlight, shielding the beam carefully. The upper slab rested at a 45-degree angle against a support column, creating the void space. The lower slab had Morrison partially pinned from the waist down. To free him, she'd need to lift the lower slab just enough to pull him clear, maybe 6 inches of clearance, no more. The problem was physics. The slab weighed at least 2 tons. The hand crank winch could theoretically handle the weight, but she needed an anchor point strong enough to take the strain. And she needed to work in near total silence in darkness, while Taliban fighters patrolled less than 50 meters away. Alina set up the winch, anchoring it to the support column with climbing rope wound in a friction hitch. She threaded steel cable under the lower slab, praying the debris would provide enough clearance for the cable to slide through. Her hands worked by feel more than sight, each adjustment careful and deliberate. "This is going to make noise," she whispered to Morrison. "When I start cranking, the guards will investigate. I'll have maybe 3 minutes before they reach this position. Can you move your upper body at all?" Morrison's hand shifted, gripping a piece of rebar. He pulled slightly, and Alina saw him grimace with pain but achieve a few inches of movement. His legs remained pinned, but at least his upper body had some mobility. "Good. When I lift the slab, I need you to drag yourself toward me using that rebar. Don't think about your legs, don't think about the pain. Just pull with everything you have. Understood?" "Roger," Morrison breathed, and despite everything, Alina heard the warrior in that single word. Broken and buried, her commander was still in the fight. She positioned herself at the winch. Through her night vision, she could see 2 guards smoking cigarettes near the compound's eastern section. Their patrol route would bring them past the debris field in approximately 4 minutes. She had to time this perfectly. Alina began cranking the winch. The cable went taut, taking up slack. Then came the strained metal groaning against stone, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. The guards' heads turned. Flashlights clicked on. "Now, sir," Alina hissed, cranking harder. The lower slab shifted, rising an inch, 2 inches, 3. Morrison pulled himself forward using the rebar, his face a mask of agony, a suppressed groan escaping his lips. 4 inches, 5. Voices shouting now, flashlight beams swinging toward the debris field, running footsteps. "Almost there." Alina cranked again, muscles screaming. 6 inches of clearance. Morrison pulled with desperate strength, his body sliding forward, concrete scraping against his tactical vest. His legs cleared the slab just as the first guard reached the debris field. Alina released the winch. The slab crashed down with a thunderous boom that echoed across the valley. She grabbed Morrison under the arms and dragged him behind a large concrete chunk, pressing them both flat against the rubble just as flashlight beams swept overhead. The guards were shouting, calling for backup. Within seconds, half the compound's fighters would converge on this position. Alina had her suppressed pistol in one hand, Morrison's collar in the other. She pulled him deeper into the debris field, using the chaotic landscape as cover. "Can't run," Morrison gasped, his legs useless, possibly broken. "You don't have to run, sir. You just have to hold on." Alina slung his arm over her shoulder, taking his full weight. He was heavy, maybe 190, all muscle and gear. But adrenaline and 3 years of brutal physical training gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Flashlight beams crisscrossed the ruins. Voices grew closer. Alina half-carried, half-dragged Morrison through a maze of fallen concrete and twisted rebar. Every step threatened to shift the unstable debris, to send them both tumbling, to alert the hunters closing in. She found what she was looking for, a gap between 2 massive slabs, leading to a small tunnel created by the collapse. It was barely large enough for 1 person, let alone 2, and it led into darkness with no guarantee of an exit. But behind them, the Taliban were organizing a systematic search. Staying on the surface meant capture or death. "We're going in," Alina said, already pushing Morrison toward the opening. "I don't know where it leads, but it's our only chance." Morrison didn't argue. He pulled himself into the gap and Alina followed, dragging their supplies behind them. The concrete pressed in from all sides, the weight of the collapsed structure above them almost palpable. This was how Morrison had spent 3 days, entombed in darkness, not knowing if rescue would ever come. They crawled deeper, moving by feel. Behind them, Alina heard guards entering the debris field, their voices echoing strangely through the ruins. A flashlight beam penetrated the gap they just left, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air. "Keep moving," Alina breathed, pushing Morrison forward. Her tactical sense screamed that they were trapping themselves, moving deeper into an unstable structure with no confirmed exit. But sometimes survival meant choosing between bad options and worse ones. The tunnel widened slightly, opening into what felt like a small chamber, probably a pocket created where multiple sections had collapsed together. Elena pulled out her red-filtered flashlight, risking a brief flash of illumination. The chamber was maybe 10 feet across, the ceiling a precarious arrangement of concrete slabs balanced against each other. One wall showed a crack of darkness that might lead deeper into the structure. Morrison collapsed against the wall, his breathing ragged. In the red light, Elena could finally assess his injuries properly. His left leg was definitely broken, bent at an unnatural angle below the knee. His right leg was badly bruised and swollen. Cuts covered his face and arms, but most concerning was the way he held his ribs, probably fractured, possibly worse. "I need to splint that leg," Elena said, already unpacking medical supplies. "This is going to hurt." "Already hurts," Morrison managed a ghost of his characteristic dry humor. "Do it." Elena worked quickly, straightening his leg as gently as possible while Morrison bit down on a piece of cloth to muffle his groans. She splinted it with materials from her pack, then wrapped his ribs tightly to provide support. It was battlefield medicine at its most basic, but it would keep him alive until they could get proper treatment. If they got out of here. Above them, the sounds of searching grew more systematic. The Taliban knew someone had been at the collapse site. They might not have seen Elena clearly, but they'd heard the winch, seen the disturbed debris. They'd keep searching. Morrison's good eye focused on Elena in the red light. "You came back alone." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." That was incredibly stupid. "Yes, sir." "And brave." "Just doing my job, Commander." Morrison laughed, then winced as the movement aggravated his ribs. "Your job was to extract with the team, following orders, not going rogue into enemy territory." He paused, his expression softening. "Thank you, Reyes, for not leaving me here." Elena felt emotion threaten to overwhelm her professional composure. "SEALs don't leave men behind, sir. You taught me that." "I also taught you not to throw your life away on suicide missions." He looked around their cramped shelter, which this definitely qualifies as. "How exactly do you plan to get us out of Taliban-controlled territory? I can't walk. You can't carry me more than a few hundred meters, and we're trapped in an unstable structure that could collapse at any moment." "I'm working on that part, sir," Elena admitted. Above them, a voice shouted in Pashto. "The American woman, the one who came for their commander. Search everywhere. Commander Nazari has offered a reward for whoever captures her." Morrison's eye widened. "They know you're here. They know you're a woman. Reyes, if they catch you." "They won't." Elena said it with more confidence than she felt. She pulled out her radio, useless for reaching friendly forces at this range, but she'd been monitoring Taliban frequencies. "They're organizing a full search. We need to move deeper, find another exit." "Or we make our stand here," Morrison said quietly. "You could still get out alone. Tell them where I am. At least you'd survive this." Elena met his gaze steadily. "We go home together, Commander, or we don't go home at all. Those are the only two options." For a moment, the warrior and his rescuer simply looked at each other. Two people who'd chosen duty over survival, loyalty over logic, courage over common sense. Then Morrison nodded. "Then I guess we'd better find a way out of this tomb." Elena helped him to his feet, or rather foot. With his arm over her shoulder, they moved toward the crack in the wall, deeper into the collapsed structure. Behind them, the sounds of searching grew closer. The Taliban were coming, and there was nowhere left to run. But Elena Reyes hadn't come this far to give up now. She'd found her commander alive against impossible odds. She'd extracted him from rubble that should have been his grave. And somehow, someway, she'd get them both out of these mountains. The only question was whether they'd walk out as heroes or be carried out as martyrs. The crack in the wall led to a narrow passage that descended deeper into the collapsed structure. Elena supported Morrison's weight as they moved through the darkness, every step a gamble that the unstable ruins wouldn't choose that moment to finish what the RPG had started. Water dripped somewhere in the blackness, either from broken pipes or mountain springs that had found their way into the devastation. "This passage goes down," Morrison observed between labored breaths. "We need to go up to escape." "I know, sir, but right now down is away from the Taliban." Alina paused, listening. The sounds of searching had faded, but that didn't mean they were safe. "Can you keep moving?" Morrison's answer was to push forward, using the walls for support. His jaw was clenched against pain that must have been excruciating, but he didn't complain. 3 years of knowing this man, and Alina had never seen him show weakness. Even now, buried alive for 3 days, bones broken, hope nearly extinguished, Jake Morrison remained the commander who'd led them through 17 missions without losing a single operator. She wouldn't let him become the first. The passage opened into what had once been a lower level of the compound, before the collapse had transformed it into a concrete underworld. Alina's flashlight revealed a nightmare landscape of twisted metal and shattered stone. But there, she felt it before she saw it, a breath of fresh air moving through the darkness. "There's an opening," she whispered. "Somewhere ahead this connects to the outside." They moved toward the air current, Morrison's weight growing heavier as his strength faded. Alina's own body was beginning to fail. 3 days of constant movement with minimal food and sleep. The stress of operating alone in hostile territory. Now the physical demand of supporting a wounded man through unstable ruins. Her legs trembled with each step. But pain was just weakness leaving the body. Her instructors at Bud S had shouted that at her during Hell Week, when every muscle screamed and her mind begged to quit. She'd learned then that the body could endure far more than the mind believed possible. The opening appeared suddenly, a hole in the collapsed wall where the structure had torn away from the mountain itself. Beyond it, stars glittered in the pre-dawn sky. Freedom. But the opening was 15 feet above them, up a slope of loose rubble. "I can't climb that," Morrison said, stating the obvious. His broken leg made any climbing impossible. Alina studied the situation. The rubble slope was steep and unstable, but there were support beams jutting from the walls, remains of the compound's infrastructure, if she could rig a pulley system. "Commander, I need you to wait here." She eased him down against a relatively stable section of wall. "I'm going up to secure a rope, then I'll pull you out." "Raise," Morrison grabbed her arm. "If something happens up there, if they're waiting, you run. Don't come back for me. Get to friendly forces. Tell them," he stopped, searching for words. "Tell them it wasn't their fault. The extraction was the right call." "Nothing's going to happen, sir. I'll be back in 5 minutes. She pressed the water bottle and her pistol into his hands. "But if I'm not, you know what to do." Morrison understood. One way or another, he wouldn't be taken alive. Alina climbed the rubble slope, each foothold tested carefully before committing her weight. Loose stones skittered down, sounding impossibly loud. Twice, the slope shifted beneath her, sending her scrambling for handholds. But finally, she reached the opening and pulled herself through into the cold mountain air. Dawn was perhaps 30 minutes away. The compound loomed above her position. She'd emerged on the lower slopes, away from the main structure. But between her and any escape route stood approximately 50 Taliban fighters who now knew an American woman had infiltrated their stronghold. Alina tied her rope to a solid boulder, tested it with her full weight, then dropped the line back into the opening. She descended halfway to help guide Morrison as she pulled from above. It would require every ounce of her remaining strength. "Morrison, I'm lowering the rope now. You need to tie it around your chest under your arms. Can you do that?" A pause then. "Roger, give me a minute." Alina waited, her muscles trembling, her mind already calculating their next move. Even if she got Morrison out of this hole, they were still trapped in hostile territory. He couldn't walk. Dawn was coming, and their exfiltration point was 3 kilometers away across open ground. The rope went taut, Morrison's signal that he was secured. Elena began pulling hand over hand, using a supported belay position against the boulder. Morrison's weight was enormous, made worse by his inability to help by climbing. Her shoulders screamed. Her hands, already raw from 3 days of hard use, began to bleed as the rope cut into them. "Almost there, sir," she grunted, pulling harder. She could hear Morrison's suppressed groans as the rope compressed his broken ribs. 10 feet, 8 feet, 6 feet. A flashlight beam swept across the opening from above. Elena froze, one hand on the rope, the other reaching for her knife. Voices called out in Pashto, guards on patrol, attracted by the sounds of their escape. "Contact," Elena hissed down to Morrison. "Guards above us." "Keep pulling," Morrison ordered, his command voice cutting through the crisis. "Don't stop." Elena pulled with everything she had. 4 feet, 3 feet. The flashlight beams were coming closer, voices shouting as the guards converged on their position. Morrison's head appeared at the opening, then his shoulders. Elena grabbed his tactical vest and hauled him over the edge just as gunfire erupted from above. Rounds sparked off rocks around them. Elena dragged Morrison behind cover, a fallen section of wall that provided minimal protection. She pulled her rifle around, returning fire up the slope. 2 guards dropped. 3 more took their positions. "We're pinned," Morrison stated, assessing their tactical situation with a commander's clarity despite his injuries. "They have high ground, superior numbers, and we have nowhere to go." He was right. Behind them was a cliff face dropping 50 feet. To their left and right, the compound's ruins offered no escape route. And above them, more Taliban fighters were taking positions, their muzzle flashes lighting up the pre-dawn darkness. Elena's radio crackled. She'd been monitoring emergency frequencies out of habit. A voice cut through the static and her heart leaped. "Any American forces, this is Shadow 2-1. We are supporting troops in contact northeast sector. Authenticate with current code." Black Hawks, close enough to hear her emergency beacon if she activated it. But using it would reveal their position not just to friendlies, but to every enemy fighter in the valley. Morrison heard it too. "Do it, it's our only chance." Elena pulled the emergency beacon from her vest, her finger hovering over the activation switch. This moment would determine everything: rescue or death, survival or sacrifice. She looked at Morrison, this man who'd believed in her when others doubted, who'd trained her harder because he expected more, who'd given her a chance to prove that courage had nothing to do with gender. "Together or not at all," she said. Morrison smiled through blood and dust. "Together." Elena activated the beacon. The response was immediate. "Shadow 2-1 has your signal. Stand by for immediate extract. Pop smoke if you can, we're coming in hot." But the Taliban had heard it too. The volume of gunfire doubled, then tripled. They knew American helicopters were coming and were determined to kill the targets before rescue arrived. Elena returned fire, her rifle barking in controlled bursts. Morrison, despite his injuries, had retrieved his pistol and was firing at targets attempting to flank their position. "Raise," Morrison shouted over the chaos. Left side, 3 tangos moving through the rubble. Elena swung her rifle, acquired the targets, fired. 2 down. The third ducked behind cover. She could hear the helicopters now, the distinctive thump of rotor blades getting louder. But they were still at least 2 minutes out, and 2 minutes in combat was an eternity. An RPG streaked past their position, missing by feet, exploding against the cliff face behind them. The shockwave sent loose stones raining down. Morrison pulled Elena close as debris pelted their position. When she looked up, blood ran down his face from a new cut, but his eyes were fierce, alive, fighting. "Not today," he growled. "We don't die today, Raise, that's an order." "Yes, sir." Elena changed magazines, her movements automatic despite the chaos. She popped a smoke grenade, purple smoke billowing into the dawn sky, marking their position for the incoming birds. The helicopters appeared over the ridgeline like angels of war, two Black Hawks with door gunners already engaging targets. Their miniguns opened up with a sound like the world tearing apart, 7.62 rounds chewing through enemy positions at 6,000 rounds per minute. The Taliban fire slackened as fighters dove for cover or were cut down. Shadow 2-1 is inbound to your position. Prepare for extraction, this will be hot. The lead Black Hawk descended into hell itself, its rotors kicking up a storm of dust and debris. The door gunners never stopped firing, their tracers carving red lines through the dawn. Alina could see faces now, Tank at the door, reaching out, his expression a mixture of fury and relief. Davis beside him, laying down, suppressing fire with his rifle. "Come on," Tank roared over the noise. "Move, move, move." Alina pulled Morrison up, supporting his weight. Bullets cracked around them as they stumbled toward the helicopter. 20 feet. 15. Morrison's leg gave out completely and they both went down. Alina felt something hot graze her shoulder, a round passing so close it burned the skin. She didn't stop, couldn't stop. She dragged Morrison forward on pure will. Tank jumped from the helicopter, running to meet them. He grabbed Morrison's other side, and together they hauled their commander toward salvation. 10 feet. 5 feet. Hands reached out, Davis, Chen, Martinez on crutches but still fighting, pulling them aboard as the Black Hawk lifted even before they were fully inside. The second Black Hawk provided cover, its guns never ceasing fire. The Taliban, realizing their prize was escaping, threw everything they had at the departing aircraft. Rounds pinged off the helicopter's armored body. But the pilot was already banking hard, gaining altitude, getting them out of the kill zone. Alina collapsed on the deck, gasping for air, her body finally giving in to exhaustion now that adrenaline was fatting. Morrison lay beside her, Tank's hands already checking him for injuries, calling for the medic. The crew chief was talking urgently into his headset, coordinating their flight path back to Bagram. Through the open door, Alina watched the compound shrink below them, wreathed in smoke and dust. Somewhere down there, Khalid Nazari had escaped again. The mission had technically failed. But as she looked at Morrison, alive, breathing, being tended to by his team, Alina knew that the true mission had succeeded. She'd gone into hell alone and brought her commander home. Everything else was just details for the after-action report. Tank squeezed her shoulder, his eyes wet. "You crazy, beautiful, insane warrior. You actually did it." Alina couldn't speak, could only nod as emotion finally broke through her iron discipline. Morrison's hand found hers, squeezed weakly. They made it out together, just as she'd promised. The mountains of Afghanistan fell away behind them as the Black Hawks raced toward the sunrise, carrying warriors who'd learned that loyalty was worth more than orders, that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes one person with enough determination could change the world. Or at least save the one person worth dying for. Part 8. The Return, 900 words. The Black Hawk touched down at Bagram Airfield as the sun climbed above the eastern peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that seemed too beautiful for a world that contained so much violence. Medical personnel swarmed the helicopter before the rotors stopped spinning, their practiced efficiency taking over as they transferred Morrison to a stretcher. Possible internal bleeding, multiple fractures, severe dehydration, the lead medic called out, his hands already starting an IV line. "Get him to trauma now." Alina tried to stand to follow, but her legs finally gave out. Strong hands caught her. Tank, always there when needed. "Easy, raise, let them work." "I need to stay with him," she protested weakly. "He's in good hands, best medical care in the theater." Tank guided her to a second stretcher. "Besides, you're not much better off. When's the last time you ate, slept? That shoulder needs attention." Alina looked down, surprised to see blood soaking through her shirt where the bullet had grazed her. Funny how you didn't notice pain when adrenaline ruled your body. Now, as the chemical high faded, everything hurt, muscles, joints, the raw flesh of her hands, the wound she hadn't known existed. 3 days, she heard herself say. It's been 3 days. Yeah, Tank said softly, helping her onto the stretcher. 3 days you were supposed to be AWOL. 3 days command has been looking for you. 3 days I've been lying through my teeth about not knowing where you went. He shook his head. You're in serious trouble, Rays, but first, let's get you patched up. The field hospital was organized chaos, the daily rhythm of a facility that had processed too many wounded warriors over too many years. Alina was cleaned, bandaged, and given IV fluids. The doctors wanted to admit her for observation, but she refused. Morrison was in surgery, and she wouldn't rest until she knew he was safe. She found Tank in the waiting area outside the surgical suite, still in his dusty uniform, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Davis sat beside him, Chen on the other side. The team, waiting for their commander. When they saw Alina approach in hospital scrubs, IV still attached to her arm, they stood as one. Shouldn't you be in bed? Davis asked, but there was no judgment in his voice. They all understood. You didn't rest until you knew your brothers were okay. How is he? Alina asked. Tank ran a hand over his face. Still in surgery. They're setting his legs, repairing internal damage. Doctor said if you'd found him even 12 hours later. He didn't finish. Didn't need to. They sat together in silence, the only family that mattered in this moment. Time became meaningless, minutes or hours, Alina couldn't tell. Finally, a surgeon emerged, still in blood-stained scrubs, pulling off his mask. He's stable, the surgeon said, and Alina felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for 3 days. Multiple fractures, 3 broken ribs, punctured lung, severe dehydration and exposure. But he's tough. He's going to make it. The surgeon looked at Alina specifically. Whatever you did out there, however you kept him alive, you saved his life. Another day buried in that rubble and we'd be having a very different conversation. After the surgeon left, they were allowed in one at a time. Alina waited until last, letting the team have their moments with their commander. When her turn came, she approached Morrison's bed with a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. He was awake barely. Tubes and monitors surrounded him, but his good eye, the other still swollen shut, tracked her movement. Rays, he said, his voice rough but stronger than it had been in that tomb of rubble. Heard you, disobeyed orders, went AWOL, compromised, operational security. Yes, sir, Alina said, standing at attention despite her exhaustion. I accept full responsibility for my actions. Morrison's mouth quirked, almost a smile. Also heard, you infiltrated enemy territory alone, conducted reconnaissance, extracted a high-value target. He paused, that target being me. Yes, sir. That's either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever heard. His hand moved weakly on the bed and Alina took it without thinking. His grip was weak but present. Thank you for coming back, for not leaving me there. SEALs don't leave men behind, sir. You taught me that. I also taught you to follow orders. But there was no anger in his words, only a deep gratitude that transcended rank and regulation. How much trouble are you in? Don't know yet, sir. Haven't been formally debriefed. As if summoned by those words, Commander Phillips appeared in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, the face of a man who had to balance impossible equations of military justice, operational effectiveness, and the messy reality of warriors who sometimes had to break rules to uphold values. Petty Officer Rays, you're to report to the briefing room at 1400 hours. Full accounting of your unauthorized actions over the past 72 hours. His gaze shifted to Morrison. Commander Morrison, glad to see you alive. Your testimony will be required as well once you're medically cleared. After Phillips left, Morrison squeezed Alina's hand. Whatever happens in that room, I'll make sure they understand you saved my life. You did what any SEAL would do. What any SEAL should do, Alina corrected gently. Sir, with respect, I'd do it again, every time, no matter the consequences. At 1400 hours, Alina stood before a panel of officers in the briefing room. Her uniform was fresh, but exhaustion still pulled at her bones. Commander Phillips sat at the center of the table, flanked by other senior officers whose expressions ranged from disapproval to barely concealed admiration. Petty Officer First Class Alina Reyes, Phillips began formally. You stand accused of going absent without leave from your unit, unauthorized operations in hostile territory, failure to follow lawful orders, and reckless endangerment. These are serious charges that could result in court-martial, dishonorable discharge, and potential imprisonment. How do you respond? Alina stood straight, her voice clear. Sir, I acknowledge all accusations. I did go AWOL. I did conduct unauthorized operations. I did fail to follow the order to abandon the rescue mission. She paused. I also located and extracted Lieutenant Commander Morrison, a high-value asset that Command had declared KIA. I infiltrated enemy territory without detection, survived 3 days behind enemy lines, and successfully coordinated an emergency extraction. Sir, I did my job. I brought my commander home. Silence filled the room. Then the door opened and Morrison entered, against medical advice, clearly, given the doctor hovering behind him. He was on crutches, his leg in a cast, his face still bearing the marks of his ordeal. But he stood as tall as his injuries allowed. Commander Morrison, you should be in bed, Phillips began. With respect, sir, I should be dead, buried under tons of rubble in Afghanistan. Morrison's voice was stronger now, fueled by righteous anger. Instead, I'm standing here because one operator refused to accept that fate. Petty Officer Reyes broke regulations, yes. She also embodied the core principle that defines naval special warfare: we never leave a man behind. He moved to stand beside Alina, a commander and his warrior united. If you want to court-martial the finest operator I've ever served with, the person who risked everything to uphold the values we claim to represent, then you'll court-martial me too. Because I would have done the same thing. Any one of us would have. That's what makes us SEALs. Philip studied them both for a long moment. Then he looked at his fellow officers, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, he spoke. Petty Officer Reyes, your actions were unauthorized and violated multiple regulations. He paused, and something shifted in his expression. They were also extraordinary. You demonstrated initiative, tactical expertise, cultural awareness, and physical courage far beyond what we expect from operators at your level. He glanced at papers before him. Furthermore, the intelligence you gathered during your 3-day reconnaissance has provided valuable information about enemy positions and strength in that sector. Alina's heart hammered. Was this leading to punishment or praise? After careful consideration, Phillips continued, this panel has decided that your actions, while technically in violation of orders, were justified by the extraordinary circumstances and successful outcome. You will not face court-martial. He held up a hand as relief flooded Alina's face. However, there will be a formal reprimand in your file, and you'll undergo additional evaluation to ensure you can follow orders when circumstances don't justify deviation. It was the best outcome she could have hoped for, her career intact, her conscience clear. Furthermore, Phillips added, and now something like respect colored his voice, you're being recommended for the Silver Star for gallantry in action. Your commander has also requested you for immediate promotion to Chief Petty Officer, pending completion of requirements. Alina couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was hearing. She'd expected punishment, possibly prison. Instead, recognition, advancement, the validation that she'd made the right choice, even if it had been the hardest one. Morrison smiled beside her, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since before the mission. Told you I'd make sure they understood. In the days that followed, as Morrison recovered and Alina healed from her own wounds, the story of her solo rescue mission spread through the SEAL community like wildfire. Some called it reckless. Others called it legendary. But everyone acknowledged it was pure seal, the willingness to risk everything for a brother, to walk into hell if that's what bringing someone home required. Martinez, recovered enough to walk with a cane, found Alina in the base gym 3 weeks later. Heard you're getting promoted, becoming a chief. If I pass the boards, Alina said, working through physical therapy for her shoulder. You'll pass, Martinez sat down beside her. You know what they're calling you now, in the teams. Alina shook her head. Guardian Angel, because you came out of nowhere, saved Hawk from certain death, and disappeared back into the mountains like something divine. He smiled. It's a good call sign, better than some of the alternatives they were considering. Alina laughed, the first real laugh since before the mission. Could be worse, I guess. Could be a lot worse. Martinez stood to leave, then paused. Thank you, Reyes, for showing us that the old code still matters, for reminding us what we're supposed to be. 6 months later, Alina stood on a parade ground at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, the sun warm on her face, the Pacific breeze carrying salt spray. Morrison, fully recovered and back on active duty, pinned the silver star to her uniform while her teammates, her family, stood in formation behind her. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action, the citation read, Petty Officer Reyes displayed extraordinary courage and determination in the face of overwhelming enemy forces. Her actions directly resulted in the successful recovery of vital personnel and intelligence, and reflect the highest credit upon herself and the United States Naval Service. But Alina knew the medal wasn't really about her. It was about something bigger, about the principle that warriors don't get left behind, about the bond that makes good soldiers into great ones, about the courage to choose loyalty over orders when those two things diverge. After the ceremony, Morrison found her by the water, both of them watching the waves roll in. You know, he said, they're already writing about you in the training manuals, using your mission as a case study in initiative and tactical problem solving. Probably also as a case study in how not to follow orders, Alina replied with a slight smile. That too, Morrison agreed. He was quiet for a moment. I never properly thanked you for coming back. For 3 days I lay under that rubble thinking I'd die alone, that no one would know what happened to me. Then you appeared like something out of a dream. You gave me hope when I had none left. You'd have done the same for me, Alina said simply. Yes, but I didn't have to. You did. He turned to face her. The teams are stronger because of what you did. Not just because you brought me back, but because you reminded everyone what we stand for. In a world where it's easier to follow orders blindly, you had the courage to follow your conscience instead. As the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Alina thought about those 3 days in the Afghan mountains. The fear, the doubt, the physical agony, the moment she'd found Morrison alive against all odds. She thought about the choice she'd made, career or conscience, orders or honor. She'd choose the same way again in a heartbeat. Because that's what it meant to be a SEAL, not the training or the weapons or the tactics, though those mattered. What truly mattered was the warrior standing beside you, and your absolute refusal to let them face death alone. The SEALs had thought all was lost when that wall collapsed. They'd left their commander for dead because orders and logic demanded it. But Alina Reyes had gone back. One operator, against impossible odds, had walked into hell and brought him home. And in doing so, she'd become something more than a warrior. She'd become legend, proof that courage wasn't about fearlessness, but about facing your fears and pushing forward anyway. Proof that one person with enough determination could change everything. Proof that the old code still mattered, that loyalty was worth more than orders, and that sometimes the right choice was the hardest one. As darkness fell and stars emerged over Coronado, Alina stood beside her commander, the man she'd saved, the warrior who'd saved her right back by believing in her when others doubted, and knew with absolute certainty that she'd found her place in this world. She was a seal, a guardian angel, a warrior who would never leave a fallen brother behind. And that, more than any medal or promotion, was honor enough. The end.